The phone call came at 2 in the morning. Margaret had always been a light sleeper. The years had taught her to wake at the slightest sound. But this sound made her blood run cold. It was Linda's voice on the other end. Her daughter-in-law. The woman her son David had married 20 years ago. The woman who had given her 2 beautiful grandchildren. "Tomorrow we're taking her to the nursing home," Linda said. Her voice was flat, businesslike. "Everything is already arranged." Margaret sat up in bed, her heart pounding. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shadows across the room where Robert slept soundly beside her. "What are you talking about?" Margaret whispered, though she already knew. She had seen the looks, heard the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. "It's for the best," Linda continued. "David agrees. We've already picked out the facility. It's very nice. You'll be comfortable there." The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone in her trembling hands. 45 years of marriage, a lifetime of loving her son, supporting his dreams, helping raise his children when Linda's career took priority. And this was how it would end, shipped away like an inconvenient piece of furniture. She thought about waking Robert, but what good would it do? He would be hurt, confused. He would want to talk to David, to reason with them. And Margaret knew, with the certainty that settled in her bones, that reasoning wouldn't work. Her son had made his choice. His wife had made the arrangements. They had decided her fate without including her in the conversation. So Margaret made her own decision. She dressed quietly in the dark, a simple blouse and slacks. She packed a small bag with essentials, her jewelry box, her grandmother's quilt, the photo album she had kept for decades. At the bottom of her closet, behind a row of shoes, was the metal lockbox she had hidden years ago. Inside was money, not a fortune, but enough. Money she had saved from her work as a piano teacher. Money Robert didn't know about. Emergency money. This, Margaret thought, certainly qualified as an emergency. She left a note on the kitchen table. Simple, direct. "I've gone to stay with Eleanor for a while. Don't worry about me. Take care of each other." Margaret, the pre-dawn air was cool against her face as she slipped out the back door. Eleanor Chen lived 40 minutes away, in a small cottage filled with books and the scent of jasmine. Tea. When Margaret appeared on her doorstep at 3:30 in the morning, Eleanor didn't ask questions. She simply opened her arms and let Margaret cry. "Tell me," Eleanor said later, after the tea was poured and Margaret's tears had slowed. So Margaret told her everything. The phone call, the coldness in Linda's voice, the arrangements, made without her knowledge or consent. Eleanor listened with the patience of someone who had known Margaret since they were 7 years old, trading secrets beneath the oak tree in their schoolyard. "What do you want to do?" Eleanor asked when Margaret finished. It was the right question. Not what Margaret should do, not what was proper or expected. What did Margaret want? Margaret looked down at her hands. Hands that had changed diapers and tied shoelaces. Hands that had cooked thousands of meals and played countless lullabies on the piano. Hands that had held her son when he cried and applauded his every achievement. "I want them to realize what they've lost," Margaret said quietly. "I want them to understand that I'm not just disposable." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then, that's what we'll do." The phone started ringing around noon. Margaret watched it vibrate on Eleanor's kitchen counter. David's name flashed on the screen, then Robert's, then David's again. 23 missed calls in 2 hours. "Let them wait," Eleanor said, refilling Margaret's teacup. "Let them worry." That evening Margaret finally answered. It was David. Mom, where are you?" "Dad is going crazy. Linda called the police. We thought something happened to you." Margaret's voice was steady, calm. "I'm perfectly safe. I'm staying with Eleanor." "Eleanor? Mom, what's going on? Why did you leave?" "Why?" Margaret repeated. The word tasted bitter. "Your wife called me at 2 in the morning to inform me that I was being sent to a nursing home. Everything already arranged. No discussion, no choice. So I made my own arrangement." Silence on the other end. "Mom, I wasn't like that. We were trying to help. The house is too big for you and Dad to maintain. And we thought you could decide my life for me," Margaret interrupted. Without asking. Without even telling me until it was already done. Linda shouldn't have called like that, David said. His voice had that defensive edge Margaret recognized from his teenage years. She was just trying to be efficient. Efficient. That word would haunt Margaret for days afterward. I raised you to be kind, Margaret said softly. To be considerate. To value family. Did I fail so completely? Mom, don't I need time? Margaret said. Time to think about what I want. About what my life looks like now. You and Linda can visit your father. Make sure he's eating properly. But I need space. She ended the call before David could respond. The days at Eleanor's house passed with a gentle rhythm. Morning tea on the porch. Afternoon walks through the neighborhood. Evening conversations that stretched late into the night. Filled with memories and laughter and occasional tears. Margaret called Robert every day. Their conversations were tender, filled with the intimacy of a long marriage. He missed her. She missed him. But he understood why she needed this time away. Linda apologized, Robert told her during one call. She said she handled it badly. She wants to make things right. Does she understand why it was wrong? Margaret asked. Or is she just sorry she got caught? Robert was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he admitted. On the 10th day, Margaret received a letter. It was from Linda. Handwritten. 3 pages long. Margaret read it sitting in Eleanor's garden, surrounded by roses and the sound of wind chimes. Linda wrote about stress, about feeling overwhelmed with work and raising teenagers, about her own mother's declining health and the guilt of not being there enough, about making a terrible decision in a moment of panic and exhaustion. She wrote about forgetting that Margaret wasn't just David's mother, but a person with her own dreams and fears and rights. She wrote an apology that felt real. Margaret folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. The plan came to her during an evening walk with Eleanor. What if, Margaret said slowly, we turned this into something positive? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. The senior center downtown, the one that's struggling for funding. What if we organize something? A fundraiser, a concert, maybe. I could play piano. We could invite the community. And your family? Eleanor asked. Margaret smiled. They could help, if they want to, if they're willing to see me as someone who still has something to contribute. The project consumed the next 3 weeks. Margaret reached out to other seniors she knew, musicians, artists, storytellers. Together, they planned an evening celebrating the talents and wisdom of older adults in the community. David called every other day. Sometimes Margaret answered, sometimes she didn't. She wasn't punishing him, exactly. She was simply prioritizing herself for the first time in decades. Linda sent another letter, then flowers. Then finally, she showed up at Eleanor's door. May I come in? Linda asked. Her eyes were red. She looked exhausted. Margaret studied her daughter-in-law, this woman who had, in a moment of poor judgment, tried to erase her autonomy. This woman who was also the mother of her grandchildren. This woman who looked genuinely broken. Come in, Margaret said. They talked for 3 hours. Linda cried. Margaret didn't. But something shifted between them. A recognition of each other's humanity. An acknowledgement that love sometimes looks like control, and control is never love. I want to help, Linda said finally. With your concert. However I can. Margaret nodded slowly. I'd like that. The night of the concert, the senior center was packed. Margaret wore a cream-colored dress and her pearl earrings. Her silver hair caught the stage lights as she walked to the piano. Robert sat in the front row, beaming. David and Linda sat beside him, their children on either side. Eleanor stood at the back, arms crossed, smiling with pride. Margaret's fingers touched the keys. The opening notes of Claire de Lune filled the room. She had played this piece 1,000 times. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like reclamation. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But more than that, it was the look in David's eyes. Recognition, respect, understanding that his mother was not just someone to be cared for, but someone with gifts to share and life still to live. After the concert, Linda approached her. Thank you, she said simply. For what? Margaret asked. for showing me what strength looks like, for not giving up on us, for teaching me something I desperately needed to learn." Margaret took Linda's hand. "We're all learning, every day. That's what family does." Margaret eventually returned home. But things were different now. She had established boundaries. She and Robert had conversations about their future that included their own voices, their own choices. They decided to downsize, but on their own timeline. They chose a smaller condo near Eleanor, where Margaret continued to teach piano and volunteer at the senior center. David and Linda visited often. Real visits, with real conversations. The grandchildren learned piano from their grandmother and heard stories of her life that made her real to them in new ways. On Margaret's 68th birthday, Linda gave her a gift. It was a framed photo from the concert. Margaret at the piano, her face serene, her hands confident on the keys. Underneath, Linda had written, "Thank you for reminding us that growing older means growing wiser, not smaller." Margaret hung it in her music room. Some betrayals, she had learned, could transform into new understandings. Some wounds could heal into wisdom. Some endings were actually beginnings in disguise. The key was knowing your own worth, and never, ever letting anyone else define your value. Margaret played piano every day. Each note was a declaration of her continued presence in the world. Each song was proof that she was still here, still vital, still necessary. And that was revenge enough.